Hey folks, it's Joe Hill here from One Planet Pizza. So I'm co-founder alongside Mike, my dad, and we are the UK's leading and original frozen vegan pizza brand. Now available in Asda and nationwide, and also in 3 or 4 territories across mainland Europe, and fast growing. And hopefully you will see us in more stores soon. So today I'm here to talk to you about the plant-based food sector, which I'm sure everyone is well aware of, has been in the limelight for some time now, but recently experiencing some serious changes. So without further ado, let's crack on. So meteoric rise of plant-based. So this really happened around 2014, 2015. But the plant-based diet has been going much longer than that. So it'll take you back a couple of hundred years, actually. So we've got religious, cultural sectors all around the world have been following whole foods, plant-based diets for a very long time. If anyone's travelled around India, for example, it's quite hard to come across meat and dairy because it's very expensive, and traditionally they've relied on plants for affordable, nutrient-dense meals. So plant-based food production within the UK and Europe has grown rapidly, much more recently, and steadily over the last few decades. But when it came to about 2013, 2014, we saw this very unusual boom within the industry, largely driven by growing mass popularity of vegan vegetarian diets, and also the rise of this flexitarian diet, which I'm going to be discussing later. And really, veganism, again, has been around for a long time, originally coined in England by the chap who later went on to found the Vegan Society, and originally was very much a sort of an extreme animal rights-based alternative diet, adopted very commonly by hippies, just by example. But recently, thanks to social media and changing trends, a lot more people have started benefiting from vegan and vegetarian diets in terms of their health, but also their impact on the planet. In particular, some documentaries and Veganuary, the non-profit, have really helped drive this growth over the last 10 years in particular. So with this increase in demand, we're seeing manufacturers like ourselves expanding our range of products, increasing our production capacities, and as a result, offering much better quality and more affordable products, which in itself is continuing to fuel this growing demand for meat and dairy-free alternatives. So plant-based in numbers. So as I mentioned, 2016 up until more recently, demand for these meat and dairy alternatives within the UK actually doubled, which is incredibly unusual within the food space, and has more recently, post 2020, slowed down to a rate of about 10% annual growth. So still growing, but has definitely started to slow down more recently. As you can see, as of March this year, about 40% of consumers are still demanding and asking for alternatives to meat and dairy products, which personally is great to see, and it's a sign that things aren't slowing down. But whether those people are buying these alternatives remains to be seen. So the numbers are slightly different there. At the same time, we can see that meat consumption is still declining. This has been happening for quite a few years now for various reasons, which I'll touch on later. But that's further fueling this demand for alternatives. Roughly 1 in 3 people are buying plant-based milks. So I think everyone here will be well aware of Oatly and the rise of the oat milk brands over the years, which has been incredibly one of the fastest growing sectors within food and drink in modern times. And 1 in 4 are now actively reducing meat consumption. So slightly behind the dairy alternatives, but not so much anymore. And largely Gen Z, millennials, younger audiences are driving this growth, with 20% of young people in Britain not eating meat anymore, and another 20% on top of that only eating meat very occasionally. So you can see how this decline in meat consumption is leading all of these younger consumers to seek alternatives that are healthier for themselves and for the planet. So who are these meat dodgers? Who are these alternative seekers? So according to YouGov, this is how the landscape looks at the moment. So roughly 2% of Brits identify as vegan. I'm one of the minority, and so is my dad. And you can imagine what those numbers looked like back in the 80s when he went vegan. So pescatarians are basically vegetarians, but they add fish to their diet. Now they still account for about 3% of the population. There's still more pescatarians than vegans, and about 6% are still identifying as a vegetarian. What's interesting though is that percent of vegans, but it's actually still quite a lot of consumers, and it has grown incredibly over the last 10 years or so compared to vegetarian. Those numbers for vegetarian haven't changed too much recently. Flexitarians, more interestingly, now account for a whopping 1 in 8% of the British population. So that's about 12% in total. Interestingly, far more women than men, almost twice as many women identifying as flexitarian. And again, when you zoom into this number, it's dominated by Gen Z and millennials. So these are younger consumers who are much more aware of the health benefits and the benefits to the environment of these alternatives. So that's kind of the landscape at the moment. This isn't changing year on year too much, apart from this flexitarian number we're seeing is still on the rise. So what's driving these huge changes within the food sector? Well, if we look at health first, which I think arguably may be the most important now, especially when we look at life post-pandemic. So when the pandemic struck and everyone came out the other side, as consumers were much more concerned about our individual health, but also the impact that what we eat and put into our bodies has on it and our overall well-being and wellness. So with that in mind, we're finding that a lot of these concerned individuals are actually eating less meat and fish and dairy and moving towards plant-based meals. So that's breakfast, lunch and tea, or as some people call it, dinner, and actually swapping out their traditional meat items, which would be the main part of their meals, and swapping it for plant-based alternatives. And that's actually 28% of meals consumed within that 1 year were primarily consumed for health reasons. So these are very concerned individuals who are looking for healthy alternatives for themselves above everything else, and they're willing to pay slightly more for it. So as awareness increases around the health benefits of vegan diets, more of us are moving towards plant-based meals. So it's a double-edged sword where we're getting more people coming into the category, and at the same time, those people are leaving those traditional meat and animal product categories. So another slightly on the same path is weight loss. So we're finding a lot of individuals moving over to the plant-based space in order to try and lose some weight. Our nation, as everyone's well aware, is still struggling with huge obesity numbers, and that's people who are classified as obese but also overweight. And we are well above average for Europe and worldwide. So it's a huge national issue, and a lot of people are taking it upon themselves to change their diets now to do something about it. And as we know, and is very well documented, the plant-based alternatives and plants in general are higher in nutrients and lower in calories, and that's relatively safe across the board. So when you look at whole foods, it's much more the case. So this is nuts, seeds, legumes, things like tofu, healthier alternatives. Not so much the case for the highly processed ones, but still, generally speaking, they are lower in fat, salt, and sugar than their meat and dairy counterparts. So high fat, salt, sugar regulations came into effect last year, and we personally felt them as a brand, where the major retailers were suddenly asking a lot of questions from their suppliers as to what their contents of their products are, and if they are HFSS compliant. So what we found was this again greatly impacted the meat and dairy industry. A lot of products out there, for us in particular, the traditional meat and dairy pizzas are very high in fat, salt and sugar, and so didn't meet these new regulations the government laid out, and had to very quickly either introduce new products that were healthier and put those on the shelves, or were unable to heavily promote their existing products that were less healthy. So a fantastic government scheme. Took a long time for it to be successfully rolled out, but now we're starting to see the benefits, and hopefully that will translate in better figures for obesity and overall health and well-being within the UK populations. At the same time, retailers more recently, this is the last 6 to 12 months, are focusing on veg-led schemes and initiatives. So Sainsbury's and Tesco's in particular are taking the lead on this. And really, they're trying to move their customers and shoppers away from both meat and dairy, but also highly processed in general. So that can include a lot of plant-based products out there, like sausages, chicken, and other alternatives such as beef burgers, which are often still ultra processed and still could be a lot healthier. And so instead, these retailers are looking for products from these brands that are plant-based, but actually focus on being higher in vegetables and legumes. So that's avoiding being highly processed and focusing on natural plant-based ingredients to fulfill this role of replacing meat and dairy. So number 2 for us, got sustainability. So according to a survey last year, more than 80% of Brits are expressing concerns about the climate crisis, climate change in general. So this number is rising quite sharply as it's becoming much more highly debated and a common topic within the media, among politicians, and in a general sphere. So climate anxiety is a recently coined term which many Brits are now struggling with. And generally speaking, climate anxiety is a fear around the unknown and the uncertainties of the climate change that we're all suffering from. As global temperatures continue to soar, we're seeing more wildfires and floods and extreme weathers, just as an example. And this is causing national anxiety, which has never been seen before, and is something that will not be going away anytime soon. So the reason that's important is because when you look at plant-based and the meat and dairy categories, 42% of adults are in agreement that eating less meat is better for the environment. And that actually increases up to a whopping 55% when you look at 16 to 19-year-olds. So it just shows that this idea that eating less meat and dairy is better for the planet is resonating with audiences, and even more so with younger audiences. So the negative impacts of animal agriculture on the planet are being heavily documented. We're seeing new series come out on Netflix and the BBC in particular regularly, and it's coming up in the news much more frequently than it was even 5-10 years ago. More Brits are turning to these lower carbon footprint foods to help do their bit for the environment. So this is something we're personally seeing a lot of people coming into the category, opting for a plant-based pizza over a meat and dairy pizza, because generally there is this halo effect that it's better for your health, but also generally better for the planet. And people feel like they can do their bits by swapping out these meals, and it's quite easy, manageable, and now much more affordable. Again, some new terms for everyone if you haven't seen them or heard of them before. So climatarians, or conscious consumers, have come about in the last 5-10 years, since climate change has become a much more widely discussed and increasingly concerning topic nationally and globally. So these individuals, not necessarily vegans or vegetarians, and they're certainly not doing it for health or animal welfare reasons, which traditionally is why people would stop eating meat and animal products in general. But instead, these people are focusing on reducing their consumption of foods which are traditionally very high in carbon and produce lots of carbon emissions. So that's CO2e, carbon emissions, total carbon emissions emitted. So we know now generally that red meats and steak in particular have a vastly higher total carbon emission output than other meats like chicken. But then if you cut out animals in total, that number drops down significantly. So by rule of thumb, if you adopt a wholly plant-based diet, you can reduce your dietary carbon footprint by about 52%. And this was some research conducted at the University of Oxford a couple of years back, has recently been refreshed. Generally, those numbers tend to be adopted by science. So, the rise of the climatarians. This is something that I don't think is going to go away. We're going to see a lot more of these people who are conscious consumers and are particularly focusing on local fruit and vegetables, but also dropping those higher emitting meats more than anything, and also probably some of the dairies out there as well. Okay, so cost. So third and finally, cost is a huge topic that's being widely discussed in the UK at the moment, post cost of living crisis. So we know that now most Brits want to eat and shop more sustainably and do their bit for the planet, and they want to buy from brands who are doing their bit as well for people and the planet. So a lot of you may be well aware now of the B Corp. So this is generally the gold standard for more responsible companies out there who are more responsible for people, planet, and their customers. So this is an emerging and growing trend again within brands to show and wear their responsibilities and be proud of them. And actually, we're seeing consumers are resonating more with those types of brands who are showing that transparency right through from sourcing ingredients to the end products that they're selling. It's still unclear to see how much more consumers are willing to pay for responsible brands, but also for products themselves that are more sustainable. But I think this is going to change once we get through this cost of living crisis. And at the same time, we know that plant-based foods generally are perceived as being more expensive, although this misconception is gradually lessening over time as we're seeing this price parity coming into play. And on that note, many cheaper animal products are reporting increasing sales as some shoppers returning to older habits in the hope of saving money and reducing their spend in supermarkets. However, interestingly, we are seeing fewer meats and dairy items when you focus in are actually becoming more expensive than the meat and dairy alternatives, their counterparts. So this is an interesting impact of inflation. For example, some of those dairy products like cream and the more expensive butters, the price has gone up so much that now the plant-based alternatives, as they're becoming more affordable and the price is being able to reduce as we're seeing those volumes increasing, are actually now coming down and matching them with inflation not hitting them quite so hard. So this is encouraging that we're seeing this price parity now, not across the board, but when you zoom into some products in particular. And I think this will only increase as demand continues to increase. So lots to think about, an interesting space at the moment. It may seem like plant-based is slowing down, but I think that's only because we've experienced such an incredible boom for many years that now it's starting to tail off. We are still seeing category growth, even though it is now slowing down and maturing and reaching a new stage of growth. The struggle now is appealing to the mass market. So these are still, most of you people out there, I'm sure, will identify as meat eaters or omnivores. So you would not say you're vegan, vegetarian, or flexitarian necessarily, but you may be warming to the idea of reducing your intake of animal products for the reasons already discussed. The challenge for us, the plant-based sector. So that's vegan pizza right across the board. All of these products that fall into this sector is to convince the omnivores, the meat eaters, the meat lovers that there are genuine advantages to coming into the category and swapping those products out. So you guys will still make up about 77% of the population. So you can see how much of a majority it is, even though those flexitarians are growing year on year. We are still a minority, and the big challenge is now to win over some of these individuals. I don't think we'll ever get all of them, but if we can get another 10-20%, it may be the momentum that we need to continue to grow rapidly as a sector. What do we need to do as plant-based brands? We probably need to focus on what's most important for those consumers that are on the fence. And I believe that's going to be health and sustainability over the next few years. And this, I think, will give us the best shot at delivering and fulfilling those needs for those consumers who are willing to come over to the category. So obviously health is a growing concern generally for Brits, as is sustainability, with the rise of the climate crisis being documented at the moment. So if we can combine and if we can deliver on health for the individuals, if we can deliver on being more responsible and helping individuals eat more sustainably without compromising on price or taste, then I think that's how we can continue to grow as a sector. At the same time, there are now growing concerns in the last year in particular for ultra processed foods impacting our health. I saw something recently and it was pretty shocking that around 40-50% of our total calorie intake as a nation is coming from processed foods, which is hugely worrying for the government and for the general public. We need to get that number down very quickly. And unfortunately, a lot of the plant-based alternatives are highly processed. So we need to now work as a sector to improve that. We need to innovate and develop alternatives that are genuinely healthier, with cleaner labels, cleaner decks, fewer ingredients, and more natural plant-based whole food ingredients. So this can be done. Tofu, tempeh, seitan, these are all tasty, affordable meat alternatives that we need to continue to innovate with and to help bring the price down and appeal to those consumers. So with the cost of living crisis, the sector generally needs to continue to bring our prices down and to become more affordable and better value. We need to do that to continue to compete with the meat and dairy counterparts that we're up against. So for us in particular, we've worked quite hard to bring our retail price of the pizza down to £4. It was originally £5.50, and in reality, the average consumer is just not willing to pay that much more for a plant-based alternative, even if it delivers on health, taste, and sustainability. We need to match on price almost above everything else. So this is one of the primary barriers as a sector that we're up against. But if demand continues to grow, if we can keep winning people over as flexitarians, we can bring our costs down as suppliers and hopefully removing that barrier for the other 77%. So hopefully that was a really useful summary of the plant-based sector. We've got a Q&A coming up next and would love to continue this discussion. I'm still optimistic about the future of plant-based despite the challenges. And I'm here if anyone wants to connect on LinkedIn. Just drop me a message, and always happy to have a chat. So thank you for your time, and look forward to hearing what everyone thinks.
Thank you, Joe, for such an insightful session and for being here with us at Bakery Live. I wanted to hear from you what your approach is to plant-based bakery. For some people, I've been hearing they want to position it as just another option for consumers on the supermarket shelves. So how are you going about that?
Yeah, very good question. And it's something that we've been reflecting on and learning from since day one, really. So when we first started the brand, we saw that the market was booming and that everyone was looking at veganism as the solution and the next big thing. So really, we created these pizzas, and we were very conscious that we wanted to create flavors that that copied the most popular flavors out there at the time. So this is making sure we have a margarita and a pepperoni, and then probably a vegetable pizza and a mushroom pizza at the time, or a Hawaiian. So really straight away just going for the top sellers to focus on volume and mass appeal rather than looking at more obscure, interesting, exciting flavors, which can hopefully come later. And I think what we did early on was we probably focused too much on appealing to the vegans, forgetting about the mass majority that I've already talked about, who really, if we want to grow very quickly as a brand and become a global household name, we need to focus on that majority more than anything. So when we launched the brand, it was very green, very earthy, and really, aimed and tailored for those extreme, that 1-2% of the vegans that me and Mike would fall into. And what we've learned and done a lot of work on over the years up until now really is actually we needed to soften our approach and our messages and our tone of voice, and actually the trick now is sort of a twinned approach of appealing to the mass majority who may be on the fence and may be willing to try plant-based foods, but don't want to necessarily feel like they're they're subscribing to an exclusive, vegan brand, and they don't want to feel like they're being told what they should be doing or eating, and that this is the only way that things should be. So now, we hope that we've already convinced a lot of the vegans out there that this is a product for them, and the challenge now is to at the same time really create a brand that resonates with the average person who may be a flexitarian and eat meat free once a week, or may just be an omnivore, an average person who has just heard about it and is interested and may be willing to come into the category.
I think that's a really interesting point, and I hear the challenge there to stay true to your values and what you truly believe in, but appealing to a wider majority. How are you communicating your message to consumers? I mean, you spoke about social media having quite a lot of power. Is that something you're utilizing?
Yeah, so most of these flexitarians, as I mentioned, are younger audiences, so Gen Z, millennials, who, without generalizing too much, spend a lot of time on social media. And so from the beginning, that was really one of the most obvious tools to use to reach these newer, younger consumers who are very savvy, very conscious about the planet and climate crisis and their own health. And so really, as a brand, we thought that's our target audience. And from there, we will build it on. And so social media was massive for us, and we still use that more than almost any other tool. And I guess really it's getting out there and meeting people. So we have a content day once a month now where we'll go out into the streets and we're going to try and just meet average people and educate them on plant-based, on the pizzas, why they should swap. But really it all boils down to taste and price. So we've learned that you have to deliver on taste. You have to be available, easy to grab and affordable, and that has to be your starting point, which has taken us a while to get to.
Thank you, Joe, for taking the time to talk with me and taking us on this tour through Plant-Based Bakery. If anyone has any questions, please do reach out to Joe on the platform.